If you can pay the bill, I'll give you the whole restaurant. The words echoed through the elegant dining room of La Bella Vista, loud enough for every patron to hear. Marcus Rivera stood frozen at the entrance, his worn denim jacket and faded jeans a stark contrast to the crystal chandeliers and white tablecloth surrounding him. The owner, Richard Castellano, leaned against the mahogany host's stand with a smirk that could cut glass. His tailored Italian suit and gold Rolex caught the soft lighting as he sized up Marcus like a predator eyeing wounded prey. Well? Cat got your tongue, or did you finally realize you walked into the wrong establishment? Marcus was 38 years old, and this moment felt surreal. After 7 years behind bars, he'd imagined his first meal of freedom differently. Not like this. Not with dozens of eyes burning into his back, judging the tattoos peeking from his collar, the prison-issued release papers still folded in his pocket, the calloused hands that told stories he'd rather forget. "I'd like a table for one," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the hammer pounding in his chest. Richard's laugh was theatrical, designed for the audience of wealthy diners who'd already stopped their conversations to watch. "A table? Look around, my friend. This isn't some diner where you grab a burger and fries. Our appetizers alone cost more than..." He paused, eyes scanning Marcus's threadbare clothes. "Well, more than your entire wardrobe, I'd imagine." A woman in pearls whispered something to her husband. A young couple filming their anniversary dinner lowered their phones, suddenly more interested in the drama unfolding before them. Even the waitstaff had slowed their movements, stealing glances at the confrontation. Marcus had anticipated judgment. Prison does that. It brands you permanently, makes society see a criminal instead of a human being. But he hadn't expected this level of public humiliation. Not on his first day of freedom. Not when he'd saved every dollar from his prison job for months, dreaming of this exact moment, a proper meal in a proper restaurant, proof that he could still belong somewhere civilized. "I have money," Marcus replied, reaching for his wallet. "Oh, I'm sure you do." Richard's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Let me guess, scraped together from washing cars? Maybe some generous soul gave you their spare change." He turned to address his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have standards here at La Bella Vista. We've maintained our reputation for 15 years by ensuring the right kind of clientele." The words stung more than any physical blow Marcus had taken in prison. The right kind of clientele. Code words everyone understood perfectly. But something in Marcus's eyes shifted. A calmness settled over his features that seemed almost unnatural given the circumstances. Those who'd spent time in survival situations would recognize it, the eerie stillness of someone who'd already calculated every possible outcome and decided exactly how to play their hand. "Tell you what," Richard continued, emboldened by the snickers from nearby tables. "Since you seem so determined, let's make this interesting. You see that menu?" He pointed to a leather-bound book on the host stand. "Our premium tasting menu with wine pairing costs $847 per person. If you can actually pay that bill in full right here, right now, no credit, no payment plans, I'll personally deed this entire restaurant over to you." The proposition hung in the air like a challenge at high noon. Richard crossed his arms, confident he'd found the perfect way to end this embarrassing intrusion. His regulars would be talking about this for weeks, how he'd handled that ex-convict with such clever wit. What Richard Castellano didn't know was that Marcus Rivera had spent the last 7 years preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Not this restaurant specifically, but for the world that would try to crush him the second he stepped back into it. And in his jacket pocket, folded next to his release papers, was something that would make every person in this room question everything they thought they knew about judging books by their covers. Marcus looked directly into Richard's eyes and smiled, a genuine, almost peaceful smile that made the owner's confidence flicker for just a fraction of a second. "Deal," Marcus said simply. "But when I pay that bill, I want witnesses. Legal witnesses. Because I'm going to hold you to every word of that promise." The restaurant fell into complete silence. Even the kitchen noise seemed to fade. Richard's face cycled through confusion, annoyance, and finally settled on patronizing amusement. "Oh, this is going to be entertaining. Miguel." He snapped his fingers at a waiter. "Set up our friend here at table 7. Right in the middle where everyone can watch." As Marcus walked through the gauntlet of staring faces toward his assigned table, something fundamental was shifting in the atmosphere. A few of the sharper diners had stopped smiling. One elderly businessman with silver hair leaned forward, studying Marcus with sudden intense interest. Because anyone who truly lived life knew one crucial truth: the most dangerous people in any room are the ones who remain calm when they should be panicking. And Marcus Rivera was perfectly, unervingly calm. Table 7 sat directly in the center of La Bella Vista's main dining room, positioned like a stage under a spotlight. Marcus settled into the velvet chair while every conversation around him had dropped to hushed whispers. Phones were discreetly angled in his direction. This was about to become someone's viral content. Richard personally delivered the leather-bound menu with a flourish that belonged in theater. "Take your time reading," he said, his voice carrying to the surrounding tables. "Though I should warn you, we don't accept food stamps here." The comment drew uncomfortable laughter from a few tables. A middle-aged woman in designer clothes actually snorted into her wine glass. But Marcus noticed others shifting uneasily, as if Richard had finally crossed a line even they found distasteful. Miguel, the waiter Richard had summoned, approached with obvious reluctance. He was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes that kept apologizing silently for his boss's behavior. "Sir, can I bring you some water while you decide?" "Please," Marcus said, his tone so polite it seemed to unsettle Miguel more than rudeness would have. "And I'll take the premium tasting menu. The full experience with wine pairings." Miguel's pen froze above his notepad. The full $847 menu? That's what we agreed on, isn't it?" Marcus looked past Miguel to where Richard stood watching from the host stand, arms crossed like a Roman emperor observing gladiators. "I believe your boss said if I can pay the bill, I get the restaurant." Richard's smile widened. He was enjoying this far too much. "Miguel, give the man exactly what he ordered. Don't skimp on a single course." In fact, he raised his voice to address the entire dining room. "Champagne for everyone. On the house. We should all witness this historic moment when our new friend here discovers what fine dining really costs." The dining room erupted in applause and raised glasses. Richard was playing to his crowd brilliantly, turning Marcus's humiliation into entertainment for his regular customers. This was a man who'd built his success on knowing his audience and giving them exactly what they wanted, even if what they wanted was watching someone fail spectacularly. As Miguel hurried away to place the order, a woman from the adjacent table leaned over. She wore enough jewelry to fund a small country and had the pinched expression of someone who'd spent years perfecting disapproval. "Excuse me, but where exactly did you just come from? Because you certainly don't look like you belong here." Marcus met her eyes steadily. "I was away for a while. Just got back today, actually." "Away where?" "Some kind of facility." Her tone made clear what kind of facility she imagined. Before Marcus could respond, her husband joined in. "Helen's right to ask. We've been coming here for years. Richard runs a respectable establishment. We don't need trouble." "I'm not here for trouble," Marcus said quietly. "Just a meal." "A meal you clearly can't afford," Helen pressed. "Why put yourself through this embarrassment? There are plenty of places more suitable for people in your situation." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Richard had reappeared, sensing blood in the water. Now, Helen, let's not be too harsh. Our guest here is about to learn a valuable lesson about living within one's means. Think of it as community service." He winked at the surrounding tables. The cruelty was escalating, but Marcus's expression remained unreadable. He simply unfolded his napkin and placed it in his lap as if settling in for a pleasant evening. Miguel returned with the first course, a delicate arrangement of oysters on ice, garnished with caviar and edible flowers. His hands shook slightly as he set the plate down. "Pan-seared oysters with Kaluga caviar and champagne mignonette," he announced. "This course alone is $78. Richard appeared at Miguel's shoulder. "Make sure you announce every price, Miguel. Our guest should know exactly how deep he's digging his hole." As Marcus lifted the first oyster, savoring it with the appreciation of someone who'd eaten prison food for 7 years, Richard circled the table like a shark. "You know what I love about this business? It teaches you to read people instantly. One glance and I can tell who has money, who's pretending, and who stumbled through the wrong door." He gestured at Marcus. "Take our friend here. The cheap haircut, the discount store clothes, the way he holds that fork, just slightly wrong, like he learned table manners from YouTube videos. Everything about him screams temporary." Like he'll disappear back to whatever hole he crawled out of the second reality hits. The words were calculated to wound, and they were working. Several diners had stopped even pretending to eat their own meals, fully invested in watching this public execution of dignity. But Marcus continued eating, methodical and calm, as if Richard's commentary was merely background music. And that composure seemed to irritate Richard more than any argument could have. "Not going to defend yourself?" Richard pressed. "No sob story about how life dealt you a bad hand?" Marcus carefully wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Would it matter if I did?" "Not really," Richard admitted with brutal honesty. "Because here's the truth, friend. This restaurant? It's not just about food. It's about belonging to something exclusive. My clients pay premium prices because they know they won't have to rub shoulders with just anyone. They're paying for the absence of people like you." Miguel delivered the third course with trembling hands, a perfectly seared Wagyu steak with bone marrow butter and roasted vegetables arranged like art. $185, he announced quietly, as if ashamed to be part of Richard's cruel theater. The dining room had evolved into something resembling a Roman Colosseum. At least 30 people now watched openly, phones recording, waiting for the inevitable moment when Marcus would be exposed and removed. Some looked excited, others uncomfortable, but none could look away. Richard had positioned himself at the bar with a clear sight line to table 7, surrounded by his most loyal regulars, wealthy patrons who'd made La Bella Vista their second home. They laughed at his commentary, encouraged his mockery, validated his cruelty with every nod and smile. "My grandfather opened this restaurant 47 years ago," Richard announced to his assembled court. "He taught me that reputation is everything. One wrong element can poison an entire establishment." His eyes locked on Marcus, like bacteria spreading through a pristine system. But Marcus was no longer alone in his corner. The elderly businessman with silver hair who'd been watching intently earlier had quietly moved to a table with better visibility. He'd made a phone call that lasted several minutes, his expression growing increasingly interested as he glanced between his phone screen and Marcus. A younger woman in a sharp business suit, sitting near the window, had also shifted her attention entirely to Marcus. She'd been typing rapidly on her laptop since the fourth course arrived, occasionally looking up with an expression that suggested she discovered something fascinating. Marcus noticed these subtle changes. He saw how the woman's eyes widened slightly when she read whatever was on her screen. He caught the elderly businessman's knowing nod, the way his demeanor had shifted from casual curiosity to respectful attention. Richard noticed none of this. He was too busy performing for his audience, too confident in his inevitable victory. "You're on course number 5 now," Richard called out, calculating loudly for everyone to hear. "That's $442 plus the wine pairings at $405. We're at $847 total. Still feeling confident?" Marcus cut into his steak with perfect technique, not the clumsy movements of someone learning, but the precise, practiced motion of someone who genuinely understood fine dining. He chewed slowly, savored the flavor, then nodded appreciatively to Miguel. "Compliments to the chef. This is exceptional." The genuine compliment seemed to catch Richard off guard more than any insult could have. There was no sarcasm, no bitterness, just honest appreciation that made Richard's cruelty seem even more petty by comparison. "Don't try to buddy up to my staff," Richard snapped. "Miguel, bring the dessert course. Let's finish this charade." As Miguel hurried away, the elderly businessman stood and walked deliberately toward Marcus's table. He was distinguished, probably in his 70s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. Richard moved to intercept him. "Mr. Patterson, please don't trouble yourself with." "Step aside, Richard," Patterson said with quiet authority that made Richard actually comply. He approached Marcus and extended his hand. "Walter Patterson. I'm an attorney specializing in real estate and business acquisitions. I couldn't help but overhear the rather unusual wager you've entered into." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Marcus Rivera." "Mr. Rivera, I want to ensure I understand correctly. The owner has publicly stated that if you can pay an $847 bill in full, he'll deed this entire restaurant to you. Is that accurate?" Richard rushed over. "Mr. Patterson, it was just a joke." "Obviously I wasn't." "I heard no indication it was a joke," Patterson interrupted. In fact, you specifically said, "I'll personally deed this entire restaurant over to you." Multiple witnesses heard it. Several people recorded it. He gestured around the room where at least a dozen phones were still pointed at them. That constitutes a verbal contract, especially with such clear consideration offered and accepted. Richard's face drained of color. You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. It was clearly hyperbole. Was it? Patterson turned to address the dining room. Did anyone here interpret Mr. Castellano's statement as hyperbole? Because from where I sat, it sounded like a very specific offer made in exchange for very specific performance. Several diners shook their heads. Helen, who'd been so eager to join in Marcus's humiliation earlier, now looked distinctly uncomfortable. Her husband had pulled out his own phone, apparently searching for something. "This is insane," Richard sputtered. "You're taking the side of some ex-con over a respected business owner?" "I'm taking the side of contract law," Patterson replied coolly, "which doesn't discriminate based on where someone has or hasn't been." The young woman with a laptop stood and approached. "Mr. Rivera? I'm Jennifer Chun, investigative journalist with the Metropolitan Business Journal. I've been researching something that might interest this crowd." She held up her laptop screen. "Is this you?" Marcus glanced at the screen and nodded. "Yes, that's me." Jennifer turned the laptop to face the dining room, and several people leaned forward to read. "Marcus Rivera," she read aloud, "served 7 years for a crime he didn't commit. Exonerated 3 months ago when new DNA evidence proved his innocence. While incarcerated, he completed 2 bachelor's degrees through correspondence programs, one in business administration, one in hospitality management." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted like air pressure before a storm. Richard's confident smile had completely evaporated. "But here's the interesting part," Jennifer continued, clearly enjoying the story unfolding before her. "Mr. Rivera also participated in a prison entrepreneurship program. He developed a business plan for a restaurant reform concept that won a national competition. The prize? $500,000 in startup capital and mentorship from some of the industry's top names." Whispers erupted throughout the dining room. Helen grabbed her husband's arm. Richard looked like he might be sick. "That's not all," Jennifer said, scrolling on her laptop. "After his exoneration, Mr. Rivera received a substantial settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. The amount is sealed, but sources suggest it was significant. Very significant." Miguel processed the credit card with hands that had stopped shaking, replaced by something like awe. The card reader beeped its approval. $847 plus tax and gratuity, $1,032.17 total. Approved instantly, without hesitation, without the declined transaction Richard had been praying for. "Transaction approved," Miguel announced, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant like a bell tolling the end of an era. Richard grabbed the receipt from Miguel's hands, staring at it as if it might change if he looked hard enough. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a ghost haunting his own establishment. "Well then," Walter Patterson said with the satisfaction of a man who'd practiced law for 50 years and still loved seeing justice served, "I believe we have a wager to settle. Richard, you made a legally binding offer in front of dozens of witnesses. If you can pay the bill, I'll give you the whole restaurant." Those were your exact words. "I didn't mean," Richard started, but his voice cracked. "What you meant is irrelevant," Patterson interrupted. "What you said, publicly and clearly, constitutes an offer. Mr. Rivera accepted and performed his part. Contract law is quite clear on this matter." Jennifer Chun was typing so fast her laptop keys clattered like machine gun fire. "This is incredible. Restaurant owner loses business over cruel wager with wrongfully convicted man." The headlines are writing themselves. Richard's face transformed from shock to desperate anger. "This is extortion. You came here planning this. You targeted my restaurant specifically to what?" Marcus's voice cut through Richard's panic like a blade. "To eat a meal? To be treated with basic human dignity? I didn't make you offer your restaurant, Richard. I didn't force you to humiliate me in front of all these people. You did that yourself." "He's right," Helen spoke up from her table, surprising everyone including herself. She'd stopped crying and now looked at Richard with something like disgust. "We all watched you. You went out of your way to be cruel. This young man never provoked you." Her husband nodded reluctantly. It was uncomfortable to watch, honestly. Richard spun to face his regular customers, desperately seeking support. "You all laughed. You all enjoyed it. You can't turn on me now." The silence that greeted him was damning. People studied their plates, their phones, the ceiling, anywhere but Richard's desperate eyes. They'd been happy to be entertained by cruelty when it seemed consequence-free. But now, faced with the reality of their complicity, they wanted nothing more than to distance themselves from the sinking ship. "I'll pay you," Richard blurted out, turning back to Marcus. "Whatever you want. Name your price. The restaurant is worth at least $2 million. I'll give you $300,000 right now to walk away." Marcus stood, his full height and presence commanding the room in a way Richard's bluster never could. "You think this is about money?" "Everything's about money," Richard shot back with the desperation of a man watching his world collapse. "I know your type. You're angry about prison, about the system, about life being unfair. Fine. Take the money. Buy your own place. Just leave mine alone." "My type," Marcus repeated softly. "Even now, losing everything, you still can't see me as anything other than a category to dismiss." Walter Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Rivera, legally speaking, you're entitled to enforcement of the verbal contract. However, I should note that actually transferring property ownership would require proper documentation, escrow, and—" "I understand, Mr. Patterson," Marcus said. "And I appreciate your guidance." He turned to face Richard directly. "I don't want your restaurant, Richard." The statement landed like a bomb. Everyone in the restaurant, including Richard, stared at Marcus in confusion. "What?" Richard whispered. "I don't want your restaurant," Marcus repeated clearly. "But I do want you to understand something. When you humiliated me tonight, you weren't just being cruel to one person. You were representing an attitude that ruins lives. The casual cruelty of people who think they're better than others because of circumstances, appearance, or past mistakes." He gestured around the room. "Every person here watched you tear me down for entertainment. Some of you laughed. Some of you felt uncomfortable but said nothing. And that silence? That's how injustice survives. Not through active evil, but through passive complicity." Helen was crying again, but differently now, tears of shame rather than discomfort. Marcus pulled out his phone. "While you were busy mocking me, I was making some calls of my own. Jennifer's research gave me some interesting information about La Bella Vista." Richard's eyes widened with new fear. "Your restaurant is 3 months behind on loan payments," Marcus continued. "The bank is preparing foreclosure proceedings. Your suppliers are threatening to cut you off for unpaid invoices. Your staff," he nodded to Miguel, "haven't received their full paychecks in 6 weeks. You've been covering it up, paying just enough to keep things running while you search desperately for an investor to bail you out." The revelation hit the dining room like a shockwave. Customers exchanged alarmed glances. Miguel and 2 other servers near the kitchen door looked at each other with expressions that confirmed every word was true. "How did you?" Richard started. "Public records," Jennifer interjected, holding up her laptop. "It's all there if you know where to look. La Bella Vista is drowning in debt. Your grandfather's legacy is about to be sold at auction." Richard's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the edge of a nearby table to steady himself. "Please," he whispered. "This restaurant is all I have. My grandfather built it from nothing. It's been in my family for 47 years. "I know," Marcus said. "You told me, remember? Right before you compared me to bacteria." The reminder of his own cruelty made Richard flinch visibly. Marcus walked slowly toward Richard. "Here's what's going to happen. I have the capital to save this restaurant. My settlement and the prize money give me the resources to clear your debts, pay your staff properly, and restructure this business into what it could be, a place that serves excellent food without serving exclusion and cruelty alongside it." Richard looked up with desperate hope flickering in his eyes. "But," Marcus continued, his voice hardening, "you won't be part of it. Not as owner, not as manager, not in any capacity. You'll sign over the deed, not because of tonight's wager, but because you're about to lose it anyway." I'm offering to buy you out at a fair price, enough to pay off your personal debts and give you a fresh start. But only if you leave immediately and never come back. 3 months had passed since that night. The morning sun streamed through the windows of what was now called Rivera's, a name chosen to honor both Marcus's journey and the fresh start the restaurant represented. The interior had been refreshed with thoughtful touches that made the space feel warm rather than intimidating. Marcus stood in the kitchen alongside Chef Antoine, a talented culinary artist who'd been working in hotel banquets and dreaming of something more meaningful. The key, Antoine explained to the 2 new line cooks, both recent graduates from a culinary program at the local community college, is that excellent food doesn't require pretension. It requires respect, for the ingredients, for the craft, and for the people who'll eat it. Miguel appeared in the kitchen doorway, now dressed in a crisp manager's suit that fit properly, his confidence transformed by genuine authority and purpose. Marcus, the lunch reservation list is full again. And we have 17 walk-ins waiting. How long's the wait? Marcus asked. About 40 minutes, but nobody's complaining. They're actually enjoying the bar menu you designed. Marcus smiled. The bar menu featured high-quality small plates at reasonable prices, delicious food accessible to people who couldn't afford a full tasting menu but deserved excellent dining just the same. It had become one of Rivera's most praised innovations. Also, Miguel continued, glancing at his tablet, Jennifer Chen called. Her feature article has been nominated for a journalism award. She wants to do a follow-up piece about the restaurant's transformation. In the dining room, the transformation was even more evident. The tables were still elegant, the service still impeccable, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. A construction worker in paint-splattered jeans sat 2 tables away from a CEO in designer clothes. An elderly woman celebrating her birthday with her grandchildren laughed near a young couple on their first date. The diversity wasn't performative, it was authentic, the natural result of removing barriers that should never have existed. Walter Patterson occupied his regular corner table, having become one of Rivera's most loyal patrons. He waved Marcus over. "Have you seen the financial reports?" he asked, sliding a folder across the table. "Your revenue is up 43% compared to La Bella Vista's numbers from the same quarter last year." Marcus scanned the numbers. The increased volume is helping, but the real difference is staff retention and efficiency. When people feel valued, they perform better. "Revolutionary concept," Patterson said with dry humor. "Treating employees well makes them work better. Someone should write a book about that." A familiar figure entered the restaurant, Richard Castellano, looking noticeably different from the arrogant man who'd ruled La Bella Vista. He wore simple clothes, carried himself with less bravado, and approached the host stand with visible nervousness. The young hostess smiled warmly. "Welcome to Rivera's. Do you have a reservation?" "No, I wanted to speak with Marcus Rivera if he's available." Miguel materialized instantly, his protective instincts still strong. "Mr. Castellano, this is unexpected." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Richard said quickly. "I just wanted to speak with Marcus for a few minutes." In Marcus's modest office, Richard stood awkwardly until Marcus gestured to a chair. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," Richard began. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Marcus replied honestly. "What brings you here?" Richard took a breath. "I've been working as a line cook at a diner across town. Nothing fancy, just basic breakfast and lunch service. The owner there is 68 years old, been running the place for 40 years. He treats everyone, staff and customers, like family." Marcus waited, letting Richard find his words. "Every day I work there, I think about my grandfather," Richard continued, his voice thick with emotion. "The stories he used to tell about opening La Bella Vista. How he'd cook for anyone who came through the door, how he knew his regular customers' names and their families' stories. Somewhere along the way, I lost that. I turned his legacy into something he would have been ashamed of." "What changed?" Marcus asked. "Losing everything," Richard said simply. "Having to rebuild from nothing gave me perspective I'd never had. Working alongside people I would have looked down on before showed me how wrong I was. And seeing what you've done with this place. You didn't just save a restaurant. You fixed what I broke." Marcus leaned back. "Richard, I appreciate you coming here. But if you're looking for absolution—" "I'm not," Richard interrupted. I don't deserve that. I came because I've been in therapy, working through why I became so cruel. My therapist suggested I might have closure if I apologized properly. Not the half-hearted sorry I gave you before, but a real acknowledgement of the harm I caused. He met Marcus's eyes directly. You came to my restaurant after 7 years of hell you didn't deserve, looking for one moment of normalcy. And I turned it into a public humiliation because I'd built my self-worth on feeling superior to others. That was monstrous. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. And I'm profoundly sorry. The apology hung in the air between them, genuine and painful. Marcus studied Richard's face and saw something he hadn't seen that night 3 months ago. Actual remorse, the kind that comes from true self-reflection. I accept your apology, Marcus said finally. And I hope you find peace with who you're becoming. Richard nodded, standing to leave. Thank you. That's more grace than I showed you. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, my grandfather would have loved what you've done here. You understood his vision better than I ever did. Near closing time, a young man approached Marcus hesitantly. He wore a uniform from the State Corrections Department, someone recently released. Mr. Rivera? Someone told me you might be hiring. I just got out last week, and nobody wants to give me a chance because of my record. Marcus recognized himself in the young man's eyes, the hope mixed with expectation of rejection. What's your name? Terrell Johnson, sir. Terrell, have you ever worked in a kitchen? Just the prison cafeteria, but I learned everything I could. I'm a hard worker, I promise. I just need one person to believe in me. Marcus smiled. Miguel, can you set Terrell up with an application? And let's schedule him for a kitchen trial shift tomorrow. Everyone deserves a fair chance to show what they can do. Terrell's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. Actually, Marcus said gently, I know exactly what it means. As the evening wound down and the last customers departed, Marcus stood in the empty dining room. This space had been a monument to exclusion and cruelty. Now it was something entirely different, proof that business success and human dignity weren't opposing values but complementary ones. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Article goes live tomorrow. Prepare for national attention. Marcus chuckled. He hadn't set out to be anyone's symbol. He just wanted to eat a decent meal and be treated like a human being. But sometimes one person's simple act of standing up for their own dignity creates ripples that spread farther than anyone could predict. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused at the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was learning humility. Somewhere, Terrell was hardly believing someone had given him a chance. Somewhere, people who'd witnessed that confrontation were rethinking how they treated others. Change doesn't happen in grand gestures, Marcus thought. It happens in small choices, to show kindness instead of cruelty, to offer opportunity instead of judgment, to see the humanity in people society has decided to discard. 7 years in prison hadn't broken him. It had refined him, stripped away everything superficial until only his core values remained. And those values, dignity, justice, second chances, had become the foundation of something larger than one restaurant. The best revenge wasn't destroying those who wronged you. It was building something so good it proved their worldview wrong. Richard had tried to humiliate him with arrogant certainty that someone like Marcus could never belong. Marcus had responded by creating a better world entirely, one where belonging wasn't conditional on wealth or background, but simply on being human. Justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet transformation of one space from exclusion to inclusion. Sometimes it arrives in success that proves critics wrong. And sometimes it arrives in the simple, profound act of treating every human being like they matter, because they do.